Happy Wednesday, everybody, and thanks for checking into our latest Trade to Black podcast. Good one coming up. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Jim Higdon, CEO of Cornbread Hemp, is going to be joining us in just a moment. Good to get somebody on to talk about the other side of the well-talked-about industry right now, the hemp industry, cannabis industry. We want to get some insights on what people are saying and thinking on the hemp side, pertaining to everything that's going on with the current farm bill, among other things, especially what's going on in Texas, but always good to have somebody on from that side of the industry to give their take. And really, are some of the concerns here in the cannabis industry legit? We'll find out that and more. Plus, Anthony Coniglio is going to join us, talk about some of these defaults, among other things, about the current landscape of the cannabis industry, a really important portion of the podcast with a conversation with him coming up as well. So with that, let's welcome in AV here on a Wednesday. Good to see you, and should be a good one here today.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm actually excited to dive into the conversation with somebody from the hemp industry.
Yes.
Versus actually talking to somebody from the cannabis industry. I mean, Cornbread's one of the, if you were to build a company on what it probably should look like in the hemp space, I mean, they're doing it right. They use organic hemp or naturally derived organic hemp extract in all of their products, full panel COAs with everything that's on their website. It's transparent, pure products. They're doing it the right way.
Yeah.
That they're absolutely one of the good actors in the space. And I mean, it's definitely going to be a good conversation.
Well, we're not a platform that's biased. We'd like to see from both sides of the equation, and kudos to you for setting this all up. So with that, let's welcome in Jim Higdon, CEO of Cornbread Hemp. Good day, sir. How are things?
Look, you're already getting me in trouble. Like, this is already so just for clarity, my cousin Eric Zipperly is our CEO. We're a co-founding pair. I'm chief communications officer.
Okay.
I handle lots of other stuff outside of the CEO role, but you're getting me in trouble with Eric calling me the CEO. So there's just a level set. That's not me. That's not my role. And it's not something that I've like. That's my background. So just
fair enough. Okay. Is it okay to say we have somebody important from Cornbread Hemp here today? How's that sound?
That's great.
Listen, I know there's a lot we want to discuss and get into this. We've had a lot of conversations pertaining to this, obviously, with the current farm bill, all that sort of stuff. And I know there's been a lot of animosity, it seems like, between the two industries. But we, like Anthony said, we like to hear conversations from both sides of the aisle. So before we get into that, just maybe a little bit about who you are, the company itself, and I guess kind of the role that you're trying to implement within the overall hemp industry.
Sure. First of all, Anthony, just send me your Venmo. I could pay you for that intro. Appreciate the kind words, because it's difficult to find them these days in the space with lots of stress levels are high and everyone's looking for some regulatory clarity and looking at other aspects of the industry as sort of the reasons why things aren't going the way they should be. So I just appreciate it. So just real quick. My background, I'm a native Kentuckian, grew up in a place called Lebanon, Kentucky, that had the notoriety of being the headquarters of the largest domestic outlaw cannabis syndicate in American history. According to federal prosecutors, 70 men in my community, 70 white men in my community were arrested on 30 farms in 10 states with what the government said was 200 tons of cannabis between 85 and 89. In a press conference in the summer of 1989, the prosecutors laid out their case. They laid out their case at a press conference because of these 70 men that they had caught, none of them agreed to testify in exchange for a lesser sentence. So they had a whole case, but no witnesses. And so they laid out that prosecution in a press conference. In the course of that press conference, referred to these guys as the Cornbread Mafia. And that term lent a lot of notoriety to my hometown and caused us to have a lot of sort of negative press and that sort of thing. No one talked about it. It was for like taboo to discuss. I went off to become a writer. I went to Brown, Columbia Journalism School, and while at Columbia Journalism School, put together a book proposal to tell this story. Quit a job at the New York Times in 2005 because I sold the book contract, moved back home, reported out the Cornbread Mafia book. Took me 6 years. And then after the book was done, led me into a journalism career. I covered cannabis for outlets like Politico, covered Washington Post news in Kentucky,
Wow.
Kentucky news for the Washington Post. and was covering the 2018 Farm Bill for Politico and realized the opportunity. My cousin Eric, who has an MBA and a marketing background, was exiting an opportunity in Nashville, moved back home. He and I got together on Thanksgiving Day of 2018 and hatched a plan to form Cornbread Hemp. So we set out to create a authentic brand based from Kentucky, and gradually we made a lot of right decisions and got through COVID in e-commerce and raised some money on WeFunder, a crowdfunding platform, and we've been off to the races ever since.
That's amazing.
So we look. There's a lot going on in the hemp industry right now. I mean, you guys are taking it from all angles. You're dealing with bills on the state level, Missouri, Florida, Texas. There's opposition coming from the traditional cannabis industry. What is the current sentiment from an operator standpoint within the industry right now? Like, how are you guys looking at like the day-to-day of what's going on within your own industry via hemp?
Cornbread is in the process of rolling out a beverage launch, and it's difficult to roll out a beverage launch when dynamics around state level regulation on beverage specifically is really up in the air. We're taking a full frontal assault from multiple aspects of the liquor industry, from distributors and manufacturers. But despite the fact that we're taking full frontal assault from a very powerful industry that has very strong relationships with key lawmakers in all these states, and it's clearly a coordinated effort by distributors to attack hemp in every state at once during this legislative session. Starting in Kentucky by virtue of the fact that Kentucky had the shortest legislative session on the calendar this year. We fought them to a draw here in Kentucky. They proposed a ban. We fought the ban. We got 5 milligrams out of the legislature. They tried to impose a on-premise ban, which is 70% of the beverage market. Or I'm sorry, 30% of the beverage market. And we beat back a total on-premise ban to get an exception for festivals, fairs, and that sort of thing.
Okay.
It's dynamic and difficult and stressful at the moment because of all of the policy dynamics happening simultaneously. To your point, you mentioned Missouri and Texas, Florida. California's on that radar. Ohio's on that radar. Alabama has a law. Big states, small states, but it's across the board. We're U.S. Hemp Roundtable currently has lobbyists active in I think 14 states, and that list of states of interest is growing. So it's a difficult dynamic time, but we're facing even before we had upset the alcohol industry with hemp beverages, and before we had really upset the cannabis industry, we started this industry by upsetting the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry has done its job preventing us from getting FDA regulations. So we're starting already behind, under the 8 ball with in a gray area where we've been legalized by Congress but not regulated by the federal executive branch, and that's why the state level policy fight right now is so hot, because there's no action in DC to give us any sort of regulatory clarity from a federal level.
Wow. So you're seeing
is the emphasis right now combating those state initiatives or fighting them to a certain extent to create draws and keep the status quo while lobbying for greater regulations once and for all via the FDA? In Washington on a federal level?
Yes, it's a both and situation.
Okay.
I've testified, right now it's the middle of April. Since the beginning of March, I've done 4 testimonies, 2 in Kentucky House and Senate, Ohio Senate, and Texas House. I'm just punching my card in state capitals, by virtue of the fact that this is kind of my briar patch, talking policy to legislators. My father's a legislator, and I have a political journalism background. So, this is not an easy aspect of the business to learn on the fly. So having some background on this makes me, well suited for this sort of role. Communicating clearly to legislators who are coming to this and making decisions that have profound impacts, not just on businesses, but on consumers and their constituents and their access to products that their consumers and constituents expect and want. But they're coming at it from a very low information perspective, and they're believing what they're being told by lobbyists and folks that they trust, which is not always completely accurate.
Can you give an example when you mean by that, Jim?
I was speaking in January to a powerful chairman in Congress on the House side of a congressional committee chair. And he said to me, "You don't do the deltas, do you? Do you do the deltas? You don't do the deltas, do you?" And that was his level of understanding of this issue. The deltas. Didn't understand the difference between Delta 8 or Delta 9, didn't understand that Delta 9 was the naturally occurring THC that he would be familiar with. He just didn't like the deltas.
Welcome to Washington, right?
So I've got 5 minutes with this guy, tops. Yeah. And so I have to educate, communicate, and persuade from that position of information. And that's just the role. But it's particularly challenging with an issue like this that's so really comes down to the nuances of production, and it's just confusing generally. Like, how is hemp legal and cannabis isn't? Nobody knows, except for Congress passed a farm bill with an arbitrary THC standard, so here we go. Right. 0.3%, where did it come from? No one knows. Here we are with it. They people convinced lawmakers that 0.3% wouldn't get anyone high. Clearly, conservative Republican senators voted in favor of the 2018 Farm Bill and the 0.3% standard, thinking that it was a non-intoxicating standard. And so now we're living in a world where that's not true. So here we are.
So you think back, and I wanted to just touch on that real quick. So Congress, you think when they passed this back in 2018, had no idea what we're going to be, basically what we're into now, is what you're suggesting, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is a R&D, form factor, product development perspective that Congress just didn't understand. To roll back the tape in 2018, I don't have a show and tell with me, the only form factor that was on the market was oils, tincture oils in the space. Yeah. And one full dropper of an oil dropper is 1 milliliter. And because the metric system is perfect, 1 milliliter equals 1 gram, and 0.3% of that 1 gram is 3 milligrams. There you go. Gotcha. Before the 2018 Farm Bill, or during 2018, there were no gummies on the market at all. And gummies changed that game completely, because one gummy can weigh 5 grams, and 0.3% of 5 grams is 15 milligrams. And so it's legal, but 5 times as much THC is that's in one of those droppers. And that's even before we get to, development of beverages, which just changes the game again. So, as the industry has evolved in its, in the R&D on the form factor side, it's changed the calculus, the math on what makes a compliant product to that 0.3% standard, because that 0.3% standard is supposed to be for the plant in the field, not for the finished product. We're talking about the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill regulates a commodity in the field, not finished products. To get a finished product regulation done, we need to go through a different committee. And we haven't been able to do that because Congress isn't really effective, and especially at the moment. And when Republicans with a very slim majority want to pass very partisan bills, they need every member of their conference to vote yes, and because no Democrats are going to vote for it, and that causes a lot of inefficiencies and inaction in Congress. So getting things done that we need done in Congress to clarify this issue is proven to be difficult. The current Farm Bill is 2 years behind schedule.
Yeah.
You had brought up education and the deltas. And when I look at your website and I look at your product, like I had alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, everything's organic, everything is full transparency, full panel COAs. Your product, I believe, will withstand the test of time and it'll battle test whatever regulations come your way. A big part of this industry, from the hemp side on the education's perspective, is synthetics and THCA flower. How are those viewed internally as an industry? Are they hurting or are they helping more? You could argue that they are helping to an extent with THCA flower. If you want to take a libertarian approach and say access to cannabis, it's a freedom issue. THCA flower is allowing people to do that. It's also opened the door, though, for cartels, gangs, illicit product to find its way into those channels masquerading as THCA flower, which I think is why you're seeing a lot of blowback from the traditional cannabis side of the angle. So it's like, how are you looking at those
Sure.
two
Well,
categories?
Right. So federal policy is very uneven, and we're living in the reality of uneven policy. There's a lot to unpack there. We have cartels and organized crime growing illicit full strength cannabis in every state. So like, you can't really pin cartels on THCA flower. You also have different constituencies in the, say, 37 states with active medical marijuana programs. Let's say 37. Kentucky's the 38th state to legalize, but we don't have a program up and running yet. Presumably, although other ones do. So, places like Texas, great example, no access to real cannabis flower, giant state geographically. THCA flower in a place like Texas is a lifeline to a lot of people, veterans and those sorts of folks. I get the concern from the cannabis industry that this is a, something that wasn't intended by the Farm Bill, but it is, it's a legal product. And until Congress says that it's not, it's serving the purpose of expanding cannabis access in an uneven way that I can understand upsets legit operators in the legit cannabis space. But now we're seeing cannabis operators in places like California growing hemp THCA flower and exporting that to other states, even though they can't sell it in California.
Yeah.
So, cannabis operators are seeing like, oh, I can just stand up part of my greenhouse and grow THCA flower in a separate business entity and wrap it up and put it on e-commerce, like and get outside the cage of the dispensary.
But I can say, like, the cannabis regulated market views probably that the same way. They want that crackdown as well. But there's so much, movement going on as far as like, you talk about the Farm Bill being pushed behind this hemp bill for like 2+ years. It's like, how do they keep up with a lot of this illicit market right now? The problem is right now, the hemp industry is you have a Farm Bill. It's actually in law. It's legalized right now with what's being conducted, and there's a loophole that's around it. So, I think with a lot of cannabis companies, they'd like to see kind of like this addressed and like really view this, because the two industries obviously are often compared to very similarly, but they'd like to see the same laws basically implemented. So do you think, there should be changes made, knowing that you are on the regulated side? Like, what's your views, to Anthony's point, on what's being done right now? And does there need to be change?
Well, we're working with Congress to regulate hemp products, to regulate legal cannabinoid products. That right now is just hemp, but won't always be just hemp. Eventually will also be cannabis. So we're working with Senator Wyden's office of Oregon to create a regulatory pathway to grant. So FDA said beginning of last year, after 5 years of delay, saying, oh yeah, we're going to get you those CBD regulations, finally said in January of last year, you know what, we're not going to do that. What we need is a new regulatory pathway from Congress in order to do that, because from the FDA's perspective, they want regulatory control of all cannabis, knowing that eventually all cannabis will be legal under federal law. FDA wants to capture regulatory authority of it. So they can't grant regulations for hemp products under existing dietary supplement regulations, which they could do, but they won't do that because it removes their leverage to get what they want, which is greater regulatory authority from Congress. And Congress does not want to give regulatory authority to FDA because FDA doesn't always do great with it. The Center for Tobacco Products is a great example.
Okay.
So Senator Higdon is working on a bill to grant to FDA the regulatory authority that FDA is requesting for legal cannabinoid products that right now is hemp, but that in the future would include full-strength cannabis when full-strength cannabis becomes descheduled. Introduced it late last Congress, just sort of as a show and tell sort of thing. And I believe the last I checked in on it, he's still shopping for a Republican co-sponsor. And then on the House side, that's also working its way through the drafting process inside the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the correct committee in the House to regulate this product, not the Agriculture Committee, which runs the Farm Bill. Right, the Farm Bill should regulate the commodity, and the House Energy and Commerce Committee, the Senate Help Committee, they should regulate finished products. And so we're working actively with members of both those committees to get legislation through. And really, getting a standalone bill passed through Congress is next to impossible. That's never how it works.
Yeah.
But if we can get the chairs and the ranking members of those two committees to agree in principle to a thing, we can probably get it attached to a larger vehicle. And with that, create a pathway for federal regulation, not just for hemp products, but for all cannabinoid products. So I understand that the cannabis industry, the marijuana industry sees hemp as some sort of pretender industry, but really we're out here on the vanguard, like bushwhacking, like creating the pathway for legal cannabis on the day that cannabis becomes legal under federal law.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception then right now? Like,
well, I mean, that we're somehow we're an opponent industry or a problematic industry and not adding any value to cannabis writ large, where I feel like the work that we're doing on the hemp side will inevitably create the pathway for federal regulation for full-strength cannabis on the other side of descheduling.
So I think you're completely right in that assumption. You're laying the groundwork for legalized cannabinoids in the United States, but that's pragmatically looking at it. If you're looking at it from their point of view, they're in a box right now getting slaughtered by 280E. They can't use credit cards. They can't use D2C methods. They can't use interstate commerce. They're operating in a box right now, while you basically are able to operate relatively freely throughout the United States and leverage other
more freely than that.
Yeah, more freely than them. So yes, pragmatically looking at it, you are absolutely 100% correct. On the other side of that, within the industry, a lot of the things that we talk about are synthetics. Where do you see those going, and where do those sit within the industry? I'm assuming they can't be seen in a very positive light when you're looking at things such as THC, THCP, HHC, Delta 10, this alphabet soup that is.
I can share. My first comment is none of those are cannabinoids that Cornbread Hemp sells.
Correct. Absolutely.
So, and also to make a nuanced point here, the Colorado state regulations around this define two different types of synthetic cannabinoids. There's purely synthetic, and there's semi-synthetic. Okay. And the distinction there, I don't know for your audience will matter much, but for Colorado regulators, Colorado legislators, it is a significant distinction. And that distinction is purely synthetic is, like harvested in a lab, made from yeast, made from something that's not plant touching. Whereas semi-synthetic is converting one plant existing cannabinoid into another, which still creates some concern on the regulated cannabis side, because Delta 8 is a semi-synthetic cannabinoid, right? But so is decarboxylated THC, because decarboxylated THC starts as THCA and is converted via a chemical process into THC.
Right.
So finding the distinction between a legitimate semi-synthetic cannabinoid like decarboxylated CBD, decarboxylated THC, and an illegitimate semi-synthetic cannabinoid becomes a very difficult question.
Okay. So do you think that not the ultimate goal, but where we get to ultimately are naturally derived cannabinoids in terms of, let's say, Senator Wyden's bill or overall regulation within the industry that are D9?
Right. I mean, the semi-synthetic nature of the cannabinoid market is largely due to the function of the 0.3% cap on Delta 9. Yeah. And so, in a future where that 0.3% standard is raised or eliminated, then there will be no need for semi-synthetic cannabinoids.
Okay.
But right now we live in a world where there's a 0.3% cap on Delta 9 THC and therefore semi-synthetic cannabinoids.
Yeah, well, 2018 seems like yesterday, but that's going on 7 years now, and look how much has changed. And I think what's, the clear message I'm getting here is we need some sort of direction from Washington, because the same problems that you guys are having in your side of this aisle is the same side as what's happening in the cannabis industry. But we got somebody from the hemp industry that chimes in with comments here and there. But Brian Dombrowski writes, if you kill the hemp industry, the black market and cartels will benefit. You guys know this and should stop the fear mongering. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to basically echo here is just elevate basically the cannabis industry to have the same opportunities within the hemp industry to have this regulated. I think that's just, ultimately what both sides of the aisle want. And I assume that you guys are probably would echo that, would you not?
I mean, look, I've developed a lot of friendships with operators in the cannabis space. I have a lot of empathy for them being in, I think you said a box. I've called it a cage. The state legal cannabis market is a terrible place to operate a business. And it'll make a Republican out of a Democrat real fast.
Okay.
It's like, you mentioned 280E, and then you've got Democrats in the Senate proposing to legalize cannabis, but keeping the tax rates at the 280E level, which is, it just crushes the entire industry, and benefits the cartels and the organized crime that's creating an illicit market. And I think eventually legislators will learn this lesson, but it's just very frustrating to watch. And and especially, Shad, to your point, we need, we need federal action to create, more parity in these industries. We need to regulate the hemp industry. We need to deregulate or the cannabis industry and find some sort of common ground where we exist in a similar world where we can speak the same language, because it's very frustrating. In the meantime, we do see operators in the cannabis space, stepping over onto our side of the line in order to take advantage of some of the aspects of being federally legal. And
what do you make of that, knowing you're seeing cannabis companies jump down in the hemp space?
Well, on the one side, hate to have competition, but the other side, the water's warm. Come on in. It's helpful to have MSOs on our side and not just all of them trying to strangle us. So, and I am not one to say that Boris Jordan of Cureleaf is right about anything, but Boris Jordan from Cureleaf is right about slinging hemp D9 beverages. That's the right move, because it's moving all of us in the same direction and getting us rowing together, so that we can find common ground on policy and push together. This is what we should be doing.
Yeah, I think his conversion of one of their medical dispensaries into a full-blown hemp dispensary on Clematis and Palm Beach, it's going to get a hell of a lot of foot traffic, and now bring down the walls of being a medical dispensary is going to be an eye-opening experience for him. I think it's going to set a tone of, you're going to see more conversions of their retail locations in select jurisdictions in the states to hemp shops, as I've got a feeling that store is going to pick up in foot traffic, and it's also going to pick up in sales volume. And it's going to be a good experiment for Boris, and I'm glad he's done it, because I think it's going to be popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real movement to unify the larger cannabis operators and the startups and the small businesses in the hemp space.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as Jason Giambi once said when he signed with the New York Yankees, I know this is going off topic. If you can't beat them, join them, right? So that's why he joined the Pinstripes with the Yankees after getting beat probably 6 or 7 years in a row with Oakland. But in this case, you see a lot of cannabis companies now hopping onto the other side because let's face it, their hands are tied. And if there are opportunities, you got to pivot, and especially during these times with where the space is right now. But clearly, it's great to get some feedback because one thing I take away from here is that we need direction from Washington in so many levels that we don't even realize. And it's not just in the cannabis space from what I'm seeing and hearing.
Well, I mean, we need to find ways to work together in the unified cannabis industry. I mean, hemp is defined as cannabis with a THC cap. Like we're we're seen as sort of, little brother or, second fiddle to the full strength cannabis market, but we're all in this together. And we're just operating from different rules, and those rules are unfair and uneven and, problematic for all the reasons that are very evident to us all. But and as quickly as we can change those rules, the better off what we'll all be. But in the meantime, we're operating in the rules and, on the rules of the road that we're given.
So where do you think we are? Where do you think we are a year from now? I mean, do you think any of these totalitarian bills that you're seeing in these major states like Texas stick? With SB3, you get some lighter version that's going to allow low dose edibles and drinks.
Lots of rumors about Texas literally today.
Okay.
So I don't think SB3 sticks. I think and Anthony, you saw me down in Texas. I went down to Austin to testify. I think I was the only person from out of state down there. And they limited testimony to 2 minutes, and it took them 14 hours.
Wow.
I watched it. I watched your testimony down there.
I got so lucky that I signed up the way I did. Like I can tell you another time how I managed to figure out how to log into the Texas kiosk system and sign up to testify before hundreds and hundreds and
hundreds. Over 400 people that testified.
It was wild.
Wow.
And that moves the needle. These legislators hear that. And the last thing those legislators want to do is stay in that room until 2 a.m.
No kidding.
That's what they had to do.
That's what they had to do. What's that tell you with that many people testifying?
It tells you that THCA flower has a home in Texas. A lot of those folks are down there, that's their access to cannabis because they live in places like Waco. And Waco doesn't have access to a real dispensary. It's just Texas is gigantic.
Mm-hmm. There was a veteran that testified that said that he had to drive 90 minutes. He was a teacup card holder, and he said that for him to get his medicine, which was in the form of, I forget what he says, but he had to literally drive 90 minutes there and back to get his cannabis.
And teacup is a joke. Teacup is the most restrictive,
it's ridiculous
medical marijuana program in name only. It's infuriating that the Texas government is selling that as something that Texans can benefit from because it's a nightmare to deal with teacup.
Yeah. Well, to Brian's comment from earlier, let's walk before we run and not kill the hemp industry, which I totally understand and get. I realize there's legit concerns, but again, this is just about people being educated, and let's not quick react, but to understand what the current situation we're in right now. And again, I'll go back to this. There just needs to be more transparency and communication that's done. Someone that you would understand more than anyone with a journalistic background, but that just is the idea that, it's all about the two companies or two industries in some ways working with each other, but elevating. Cannabis wants to be elevated the same opportunities that the hemp industry has. And, I think that's a fair assessment. We just want everything to be regulated, but until we get direction from Washington, we stay in this gray area. So with
I'm sorry, but just across the board, banking, taxes, access to capital, getting loans that aren't at usurious rates, all these things that cannabis operators have to go through. It's challenging enough being in the hemp space, but at least we're legal under federal law and pay regular taxes, but it's just, it's frustrating on the hemp side to watch what full strength cannabis operators have to go through. It's not great.
So we've talked about, will we see change? Would you like to see change as to what's going on with the current farm bill and some of the work there that's being conducted within the hemp space?
Sure. Like I said, the Farm Bill should be regulating the commodity, not the finished product.
Okay.
So we saw last year, Mary Miller introduced an amendment to ban all hemp products or all hemp products with THC, which is all effective hemp products, because even CBD products, aren't really effective unless they're full spectrum with, some THC in there. And it seems like she told the chairman that he had to include her amendment in order to get her vote, and the vote was tight. And so he did that to get her vote without calculating the fact that he was going to lose 3 or 5 or 7 Republican votes because of the Mary Miller amendment. And the Mary Miller amendment could very well have been the reason why the Farm Bill didn't move last year, because there wasn't the votes to pass it with it in there. And they passed it without a vote in the committee. Andy Harris passed the rider in the Agricultural Appropriations Bill without a vote in committee, just slapped it in and ran it. And that killed the bill. So, I think Republican leadership has learned that stove is hot. I don't anticipate that happening again this time. If they're trying to get a Farm Bill out, again, it has to become a priority for this Congress to move it. And it doesn't appear to be a priority yet. But once we peel away finished product regulations into a different bill and go to a different committee, the one thing that I would like to see on the hemp side in the Farm Bill is to move that 0.3% threshold up to 1% for the sake of farmers, because we're still seeing something like 25% of the hemp crop being destroyed for being non-compliant on the THC side. So, it's tough enough for our farmers to farm hemp, and the fact that they're losing 20-25% of their crops, generally speaking, because they're hotter than an arbitrarily low standard, isn't doing anyone any good. So if we can regulate finished products with give us a 10 milligram cap on finished products, and then it doesn't matter that the crop is at 0.3% or 1%, because we have finished products capped at a certain milligram cap on a serving size basis, which is what that should be.
Well, listen, I'm glad that you came in here today. I hope you got something out of this, and we definitely did on some of the stuff that you passed. I didn't want you to feel like we were you were the turkey invited to Christmas dinner here today, but I hope you got some great feedback. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at some of these comments, and I understand people are infuriated with what's going on in this space. I get it, people. We understand that. We don't need to continue to shout it out. What we're trying to come up with here is transparency, constructive feedback, and most importantly, some dialogue that we can all learn from, because we are in the situation that we're in. But now let's put a game plan together that makes sense for both parties. So with that, I appreciate you logging on here today, and pleasantly surprised and nice to know that I get to bring somebody on with a nice journalistic background. I don't get that too often on this podcast.
Hey, and look, I'm at Jim Higdon on X, and I'm happy to be a resource for folks if if they have actual questions and don't just want to call me names. Feel free to reach out, and we're happy to be a resource for cannabis operators, people in the industry looking to get into the hemp side. There's plenty of opportunity here. If folks need contacts with Kentucky farmers and that sort of thing, another resource we'd be happy to provide.
Yeah,
that's a whole different conversation that I wanted to jump into, is the biomass side of the industry, because that I feel no one knows anything about. We'll have to talk about that when we bring you back, because that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, really appreciate you guys.
Maybe it's time to do a podcast next month in Churchill. We'll go to the Derby and talk and get the camera set up in the bleachers. Does that sound good?
That is a terrible idea.
Most locals hate the Derby, do they not?
Mint julep season lasts about 48 hours for a local. You're like, ooh. Yeah. It's the entire world shows up, and and it's it's Super Bowl every year here, and it's great. We love it. It's wonderful. I'm going to New York this year for Derby weekend. I'm not staying around.
Yeah.
Last year we went. It was great. I mean, Derby's great.
The Oaks on Friday is awesome. The stuff on Saturday, that's a zoo.
The Oaks is now as bad as Derby, except everyone wears pink, so it's really offensive.
Yes,
it's just really clashy pink shades everywhere. So it's 150,000 people, and 125,000 of them are wearing pink on Oaks Day.
Wow.
Yes.
It's a special day. Now it's increasingly the Thursday of Derby week they call Thurby.
They do.
Wednesday was called Wokes for a while, but I think that's probably passed. And then, like on down the week of Derby week is just like, great racing all week long.
Yeah.
But Wednesday of Derby week is really where the locals kind of show up and do their thing. But we've got a horse that should be running at Churchill later in May. Our angel investor is a horse breeder, and he has named a horse Drink Cornbread.
Nice.
And Drink Cornbread's debut race as a 2-year-old colt should be in Churchill in May. Not sure exactly when, but if you want to come down for that, I'll let you know when the race is.
Yeah.
Well, I've talked to people in Montana, and I asked them about the show Yellowstone. They absolutely hate it because it's just driven so many tourism to that state. But I get the same impression for Derby weekend. It's like the whole world comes. But I think it's something at least you got to check out once on the bucket list. But it is a lot of fun. But listen, I appreciate you checking in here today. We got to run, but great feedback. And again, we can get into the biomass conversation and have you on again, okay?
Whenever you like.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Anthony.
Bye. All right. Good little interview, to say the least. Let's now hop into segment number 2. Welcome in Mr. Anthony Coniglio from NewLake Capital. We were supposed to get started with you about 10 minutes ago, but this got delayed a little bit more. But what did you think of that conversation? Did you get a chance to listen to it, and any takeaways from your end?
I did. I listened to it. I thought it was a fabulous segment. I thought it was a very pragmatic discussion about the hemp side of the story, but it also raises, it's the epitome of what the federal government has created in this disconnect between the two markets. What I reflected on here is the concept that all intoxicants should be regulated. And whether that's alcohol or whether that's cigarettes or whether that's THC, these are all intoxicants and they should be regulated and age gated. And really, I think he made a very compelling case on why hemp-derived intoxicating products should be regulated. He really, in my opinion, what I heard in there, if I was a regulator, was he didn't really ask for it, but they're asking for regulation to say, hey, let us grow, but these intoxicating products should all be in that same category and should be regulated. It made the case.
Yeah. Well, I can honestly sit here and say today that this is the benefit of what we do, podcasts versus traditional television, because you can have an in-depth conversation and learn more versus being on for some of this stuff that he was saying. Like, I've got 5 minutes to speak to a congressman or a senator, explain as to what's going on, because you don't make those deltas. It's just another chapter into how much disconnect, not just in cannabis, on the hemp side too, as to what's going on in Washington versus the states level. And it's wild as to how much this has just been, it hasn't been a priority. And because it hasn't been a priority, think of how much has changed in a 7-year span, right?
Right. But let's be real. When you talk about cannabis products in the state legal process, nobody talks about them as Delta products. It's really the industry. So what I heard in that, quite frankly, was that legislator was hearing from constituents about the problem products. And it's the Delta 8, Delta 10 that in the marketplace, that's the way they're described. Our industry doesn't describe their products as Delta products. So what he's hearing from his constituents is the problem products are the quote unquote Delta products, which I don't want to say by definition, but by implication are those unregulated products. So, even in that kind of conversation, you talked about education. Yeah, he's going to educate that legislator on what Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10 mean. But what's missing in that dialogue is what are the products that are creating the problem for the constituents? It's all about health and safety. I just keep coming back to health and safety. And if you're going to consume something, particularly if it has an intoxicating impact, it should be regulated. I think it's really hard to argue against that. And quite frankly, I heard him saying that he thought they should be regulated.
Yeah.
In a country that loves regulation, it's hard to believe that we're sitting here and we still haven't had cannabinoids regulated, especially when you look at what the intoxicating hemp products are privy to and just have the freedom to basically do or coexist as they please. And meanwhile, the FDA, none of the governing bodies, nobody seems to want to regulate it. Just let it be. Everything's fine. It really makes no sense, except for the fact that it might be on purpose.
Yeah. Listen, want to have you on just a couple of
Go ahead. Yeah, let's pivot. What do you want? No, what do you want?
Good to see you, bud. Always love having you on. I wanted to have you on just because last time we talked, I know we had Frank on a few times and we have kind of an idea as to like some of these defaults that are being reported, because a lot of the lease agreements were put together 2, 3, 4 years ago, and the industry was a lot better shape. But how are you, I guess, adapting to a lot of this stuff right now? And more importantly, like, why do you think, or like, how do we change this, or could be changed? Like, what are some notable things that investors should be paying attention to?
Yeah. There's a lot in there. So yes, there's been a lot of media attention around recent defaults. And listen, I'd say it's not just leases that people are defaulting on; it's loans that people are defaulting on. There was a public company, Schwaz, recently public company, had a disclosure that they defaulted on their lender, and their lender swept all their cash pursuant to a sweep agreement. So there's lots of companies that are going through this, both public and private. I think what we've seen, though, is some of the headlines around some of the more larger scale defaults. And I think what's happening here is this industry, and guys, we've been doing this now together for well over a year, and we've talked about what a difficult time the cannabis industry is going through. And I think there was probably a podcast or two we could find from last year where I talked about 24 being that year that organizations needed to hang on and survive and get through.
Right.
And for those lenders and the landlords in the space, they could make modifications, utilize security deposits, or amend and extend. But at some point, a decision point is made on the part of the borrower or the tenant. And I think what we're seeing just runway run out for some of these companies. They don't have any more levers to pull, and the runway runs out. And so therefore you see increased levels of default. And by and large, I think a lot of those were hoping that at the end of 24, we would have seen legalization in Florida that would have given a shot in the arm. And so the absence of that, coupled with the delay in the Schedule 3 hearings, I think has made 25 for many people be the year of capitulation, unfortunately.
So we talk about institutions coming into this sector eventually on the back of reform. We talk about there being a wall of capital sitting there, whether it's high net worths, financial advisors, funds, et cetera. Do you think that the calculus in the way that they invest has changed when they look at the risk profile on cannabis operators? And on CNBC yesterday, they had someone from Apollo on there that was talking about how popular private credit's getting, because essentially you're sitting at the top of the cap stack and you're insured to a certain extent via the equity. Do you think that when institutional capital, or when we do see a wave of capital come into this space, they're going to say no thank you to the public equity that they're seeing in the market, and start to create these deals that really structure them to be at the top of the capital stack via some of these private credit agreements, debt facilities, investing to that degree?
No, and I will tell you, having been on the street for a long time and earlier in my career, those organizations are very economically focused. They will underwrite. They will underwrite the financials. They'll underwrite the business model. They're not going to look necessarily at the past entirely and say that's the path to the future. I do think there's going to be a large amount of discerning. They'll look at the past to inform them for what the future could be and how that management team maybe has handled things. But I think they're very much going to look at what the future holds, because let's be real, the moment in time when they're going to be able to focus on this industry and they're going to become interested in this industry is going to be a moment in time that's a sea change for the industry. And so the outlook for the future will look very different then than it does, say, sitting here today.
Yeah, I get that. There's been actually some feedback too, where some of the Qs, I guess this is what I was reading, Q's sales leaseback providers are charging sky high rental rates, citing it as a cause of financial difficulty for operators. Is that true? How do you respond to that criticism?
Yeah. Wow, I thought Jim was going to have it tough today. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm happy to talk about this. We're very transparent at NewLake. So actually, I guess I'm going to say thank you for giving me the platform to talk about it. So let's address it. If you look at our investor presentation, we talk about the yield on our assets averaging 12.1% across the portfolio. That's the average. There's not a wide delta. We don't disclose specifics for each of our tenants. But when you look at that relative to the cost of capital for a loan, it's actually under where most of the operators can borrow at, and where you see people refinancing their debt at. So, I'll speak to our portfolio. Now, some of that criticism is for other organizations that maybe put on leases years and years ago, maybe back 5-6 years ago, with significant escalators. And listen, I don't know where they started. Sometimes you price these transactions based on the risk profile of the tenant, the risk profile of the property, the risk profile of the state that you're in, and that maybe is driving up some of it. I'll tell you, within our portfolio, one of the things we do, and you guys have heard me talk about this, we emphasize what we call EBITDAR, that's EBITDA plus rent. And when we enter into these long-term leases, we run out a model kind of for years and years to come that assumes price compression in the marketplace, but assumes EBITDA compression, margin compression, because that's just naturally what happens for these businesses. And we do that and we size it relative to the rental obligation. Why? Number one, we want to make sure that there will be enough cash flow to pay rent. But number two, and really important for this conversation, we want to make sure that the tenant has the ability to generate free cash flow for itself. Because if you do a deal where you're taking 50 or 60% of the cash flow of the business just for yourself, and there's not really much left for the tenant, that's not good for the tenant from a credit quality perspective. And it doesn't create that partnership. And it also doesn't give you longevity on being able to collect rent. So that's kind of our approach. And we publish our EBITDA coverage in our investor presentation as well. And across the portfolio, it's a little over 4 times EBITDA coverage. And so that means that there's meaningful cash flow that's being provided by these properties, which means that our tenants are earning money at the properties that we own.
Yeah.
And that's the most important metric that we look at.
Speaking of tenants, I know that you were with us in DC 3 weeks back at the GCRs conference. What were some of your main takeaways from that? And I mean, are you looking at Europe, or would you look at Europe on a go-forward basis as far as deploying capital? Or can you actually with the mandates currently with NLCP?
Yes, we certainly can, and we are. We're a real estate investment trust, but we're not limited to U.S. assets. And so let me just a quick comment on the conference. I thought it was a terrific get together of global participants to start this harmonization and this dialogue amongst the international players. That's really important. It's not going to be the be all end all. But I just saw recently in the WhatsApp, there's a WhatsApp group coming out of that, some really strong communication and coordination around messaging and education for the industry globally. And we can only benefit from that. So I was thrilled to be a part of it. And I thought it was a really great first conference and a first step. In terms of your question about Europe, we have been paying attention to Europe. I spent a little bit of time there last year. I'm heading over to a Berlin conference in a couple of weeks. And we're trying to learn, we're trying to understand. I was really happy to see that that Germany is not going backwards in terms of its legislation now that they've got a new coalition government in place there. I was disappointed to see that UK didn't make as much progress as people were hoping. But the short answer to your question is we are interested in Europe. We're trying to learn more about it. And if there are good investments that will create value for our shareholders, we'll pursue those. Yeah.
Well, let's face it, we're seeing a lot of change right now. I'd like to see, I did this video yesterday, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like we're almost looking at, there's almost a 3-tier system right now. You've got your tier 1, which is your elite operators. You got your middle of the pack, and then the last one is just, you can understand some of the other companies that are in some very, very difficult, strenuous times at this time. But how much are you adapting, I guess, through time? Because, when we had you on beginning of the year, you thought this is going to be a year of consolidation that you'll see over these next 18 months here in 2025 going into 2026. But how are you navigating through all this and really, I guess, quantifying who you're working with, given the current times that we're in here in Q2 of 2025?
Yeah. So play back that reel. I talked about consolidation, but I wasn't somebody who believed that we were going to have massive M&A across the space. What I think we're going to see is we're going to see more of the divestitures of a particular state, somebody buying up additional dispensaries to bulk up in their size where they can, tuck-ins here, expansions there. I think you'll see a lot of that type of activity as people try to take advantage of relative strength for those that are strong, or those that are looking to optimize their business and enhance maybe their cash position, they'll be doing some of that trimming. And something I've always said here is this industry is not monolithic in terms of its approach to business. These executives don't just sit there and say, this is what I did last quarter, this is what I'll do next quarter. They're constantly trying to evolve. I talk to CEOs across the sector, and I continue to hear people talking about rationalizing SKUs, thinking about headcount, thinking about footprint. They're not happy with where they are. They're constantly fighting to move forward, to improve cash flow, to improve operations. And there's some smart people in this industry. And so they're going to adapt. I think they're going to adapt. It's hard. There's a lot of the low hanging fruit has been done already last year in terms of headcount reductions and kind of mission rationalizations. But listen, people are working hard to optimize cash flow and returns for their stakeholders.
Yeah. Lots on the go right now. And I know there's constant change, that's for sure. But, it is a time where, like you said, we're going to see a lot of consolidation, but it's all based on execution fundamentals right now, because I know whatever your pitch deck was from 4 or 5 years ago, that's just it. It was 4 or 5 years ago. And now we actually have the maturing of an industry, and the real players are going to obviously step to the forefront. And you're seeing other companies. It's the reality that we're in. Do you not think?
I do, but I don't think this industry is behaving terribly different. I hesitated because I wanted to be thoughtful. I don't think this industry is behaving terribly differently than other industries that had significant competition going through a rationalization period. Sure, other industries don't have the 280 issue, don't have the regulatory issue, don't have intoxicating hemp. I get all of that. But just in terms of its evolution and the maturation process of an industry, one that had significant new entrants needed to have a rationalization at some point.
Right.
And you're going to get that consolidation. And we're going through that cycle. We're going through, I think, a slower growth cycle as we have limited activations for both new medical programs and medical into adult use programs. And that requires companies with limited, if any, access to capital to have to tighten the belt down, focus on cash flow. And I think it's a natural evolution. It's hard and it's painful. This industry will get through it. And that's why we're in this industry. And that's why we have nearly $500 million of real estate in this industry.
Well, I think a lot of people, this industry isn't collapsing. It's just maturing. And this is all part of the process, right? But understand the process is the key for people and manage expectations. So, I think that's always been some of the confusion amongst investors, but this is not investment advice. I just think this is part of a growing process. But anything else you want to add there?
No, I would just say we get so focused on regulatory reform because of the obvious benefits that we're going to get out of it. And as an industry, from a psyche perspective, we seem to really get excited about swipe of the pen or executive action or executive order by Donald Trump or a tweet. I think we have to have patience. I know that's hard for anybody that's invested in equities. Feels like, my gosh, how long do I have to wait? But we've always said, at least on the NewLake side, we believe that reform will happen. We just can't say when. So that means you have to have the liquidity and the staying power and the patience to get to the other side. And it's just going to take time. It's longer. It's going to take longer than we think. It's going to be harder than we think. It's going to cost more money than we think. But I fundamentally believe that it will happen. It's why I continue to stay focused on the business. We've been at it for 6 years here at NewLake, and we're buckling down for the future and committed to this industry because we do believe the reform will happen. And we think that if you have the ability to get to the other side and you have the patience, we think the reward will be significant to be one of the leading providers of capital to the industry when we finally get those reform measures put into place.
You had brought up headcount rationalization amongst some companies that you're talking to, and I can't help but think, I've been paying attention to this industry now for, let's say, a decade. Yourself, Eric Moff, Jim Cacioppo, you guys were executives on Wall Street at bulge bracket banks and came into the cannabis industry. We saw major CPG executives and tech executives come into the cannabis industry in the early days. And we haven't really seen any more of those waves in terms of human capital from other industries coming in to the cannabis industry. We've seen a retraction, we've seen a stagnation, if not a retraction in human capital in the space. Do you think that we see another wave and that gets that bench on some of these organizations and it gets refreshed with reform coming into the space moving forward?
The two key words in there were with reform. I think talent goes where opportunity is. And right now, to recruit somebody into this industry that has alternatives, right? Because we always have to put it in the context of alternatives. That's also the comment around capital. When people talk about capital looking at the industry, even when reform happens, that capital will be looking at what is the alternative for them to go into. So right now, and previously, maybe it was crypto, maybe it was tech. Right, that's where capital will flow. Same for the executives. They're going to be looking at that moment in time that where are the opportunities, and they're economic animals as well. They're going to say, is it better for me to go into the cannabis industry and ride this reform wave, or is it better for me to pivot into finance or into tech or into media, whatever might be hot, or into crypto at that particular time? So yes, I think if the opportunity set is there, the industry will be able to recruit super high quality talent. It's not saying we don't have super high quality talent in the industry today, but at that time that reform happens, I think you'll have super high quality people looking at it as an alternative. Whereas today, it's really hard to pull people away from other alternatives.
Yeah,
well, rescheduling with proper research, I can only imagine what that would attract. But like you said, we need change. And if you're going to attract talent, you need opportunity. It's a great way of looking at it. And let's face it, this industry was all based on a lot of opportunity in the early days. But very good point. Way to outline that. And I can't help but firmly agree with what you've outlined, because I think even though we think that there's going to be a lot of change, just from a pure business infrastructure standpoint, there's probably more changes than what we can imagine in the event we do get rescheduling, and how this will really shape up and how people will start to view this industry in a completely different light. But if we've gone this far, there's no point in turning back now, right?
Yeah, for those that are in it and are committed to it, we're not turning back at all. I think there are a lot of people that have turned away from the industry, to be quite blunt about it. And I can't blame them, right? Everybody's situation is different. There are so many people who left great careers to move to the industry, took a lot of equity, have seen the value of that equity go on. And let's be clear, we only have a finite amount of working time. And depending on where you are in your career, you may not want to gamble the next 3 to 5 years that the equity value that you had received will come back. You may say, boy, I'm losing time here and I need to pivot out. So I'm never going to judge anybody. Everybody has to make their own decision. But again, to go back to what I said, I fundamentally believe reform will happen. And I think those with patience and the liquidity and ability to weather it out, I think we'll be rewarded on the other side.
It's great. One of the most well-respected people in the cannabis industry, Anthony Coniglio. I learned something new all the time. And I didn't realize in a recent interview with Zach George that he lives in the same town as you. So small world. Do you talk much with Zach?
We try to get together. We used to get together quarterly. There's a couple of other people in town here from the industry. We haven't gotten together in probably 6 months. This is a good reason for me to reach out. Hey, Zach, if you're watching out there, save me the email and reach out. Let's get together for lunch.
Well, it's not too often you get not one, but two CEOs of two well-known cannabis companies in the space. That's pretty remarkable, but too funny. I thought that was interesting paths that we'd found out through a recent interview with Zach. But I hope before I go, what happened here, my friend? We've had a few comments. You all right? Did you break your nose?
Well, there was a hemp guy on this side and a cannabis guy on this side. And I was, no. Before you move stuff in the basement, make sure there isn't a metal bar on the top that's going to come down and hit. So I had a bit of a gash here. And so, listen, I wasn't going to be a model to begin with. I'll live with the scar, but this is trying to keep it from needing stitches.
You look good, my friend, regardless. But listen, always good chat with you. Let's keep in touch, and appreciate the feedback and a lot of the education you provided here today, okay?
Yeah, good talking to you guys. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks,
Exactly.
Anthony. All right. We are a little over an hour into this, but before we run off, because I know this is going a little long, what'd you think? What was your big takeaway from the conversations here today?
Solid. It was good
Yeah.
to good to speak with Jim. And I mean, I said we're an open platform, so I mean, to get a hemp operator's perspective and
I
to
know.
get someone from the hemp industry's point of view, especially somebody that's running a hemp business that's above board in that space, and what they've built is built to last within the industry. That if they do get regulated, this is probably what it's going to look like. Organic, naturally derived D9 cannabinoids that are coming in low dose edible form and drink form. I think that's got staying power. I think what they've built is tremendous, and I mean they're doing well. They're one of the better companies in the space, and obviously he's got the fundamental understanding of the political landscape as well.
Yeah.
Which I don't think you see very much of in the hemp industry, much less the cannabis industry.
Well, I wasn't.
So it was a good, insightful conversation. I look forward to having him back.
Wasn't expecting that kind of background either. What'd you make of him saying that if there is changes to the Farm Bill, we'd like to see the threshold of THC change from 0.3 to 1%? Will that is that any concern whatsoever?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Like he'd alluded to, the 0.3% just doesn't really make sense. It's not supposed to make sense as it relates to intoxicating hemp products, because the 0.3% was never intended to govern an intoxicating product industry. It was built to govern textiles, hempcrete, industrial applications for the hemp plant. So that 0.3% doesn't make sense. If the 1% does make more sense, then I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. But at the same time, I'm interested to actually ask these guys, if all cannabinoids get regulated and we're all on an even playing field, does it make sense to use hemp still as an input product versus traditional cannabis if the red tape is taken away and it's all on par with one another? So that's, like I said, the whole biomass conversation is a much different conversation.
Yeah, I think that's part, because there's probably a few things you could teach me pertaining to that as well, because there's a lot of things I don't understand, because it's not just, there's so many other things that hemp does do, but it needs to be regulated, as we know right now. And I know he brought up a couple of points about the black market, but we're not sitting here not pounding our feet in a lot of ways too, regarding the illicit market, because that's been an ongoing issue as well. But one thing's for sure, as much as we have our problems right now, equally, you have a lot of the same problems as to what's going on the hemp side, with the disconnect as to what's going on in Washington. But obviously the big thing for us right now is that there's a loophole and it's passed by law. And the difference between the illicit market and them is that they're able to do it. And that's where the change needs to happen, and happen fast. But more importantly, I know we sit here and get angry with what's going on, but it's not what you say, but how you say it. And presenting the right information is key. But I think the whole point in here is just continue to have a platform where we can have both people or representatives from both industries on to get a better understanding.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point in getting angry. If you want to do something, do what Boris is doing. Boris is embracing it. Boris is gaining business intelligence and gaining an upper hand on his competitors with diving into the industry. They're going to be learning a ton from what they're doing in the beverage space with this new dispensary that they've opened in West Palm Beach. It's invaluable business intelligence that they're getting. Don't sit there and be pissed off and argue and want to regulate them out of existence. Figure out the business and figure out how you can figure out their business and figure out how, in ways that can enhance your business at the same time.
Accepting the situation for what it is, and that can actually get you into the plan of action and answers and solutions. And I think people within the cannabis industry have valid points, but at the same time too, I know some of you are thinking that enough's enough. Why has this been stalled since 2018? It's the same reason why cannabis reform has been stalled for the longest time. It hasn't been a major priority, but things have changed. And if you have to ask yourself, is this more of a conversation that's going on in the political realms today versus, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago? Of course it is. So there is progress being made behind the scenes. But go ahead.
Jim brought up another really good point, that politician had just referred to everything as the deltas. It's like when we went to Washington for the first time, asking politicians about rescheduling, and they're looking at us like we're speaking Spanish. They had no idea what was going on.
None.
It's not in their best interest, or it's not a priority for them to be up to date on cannabis legislation when God knows what else is going on right now up in Washington.
Yeah. Getting some feedback here. Looks like I need to take Tesla down from my stock ticker. I'm getting some hate here. So
yeah, there's no reason to take Tesla down from the stock ticker.
I'm like, let's not read too much into this, people. Focus on the show and that's on the ticker. It's not, I don't even care what's up there. It's just a little bit of ambiance just to make it look like it's financial media.
Just have it repeating Tesla the entire show on Friday.
Do I need to? Yeah. Seth Yakutin's going to be coming on. We're actually, we're off Friday, but we're releasing content Friday morning at 11 a.m. It's going to be a pre-record, but Seth Yakutin's going to be coming on. He actually sent me a list of topics that we need to discuss. If I can highlight this real quick, we're talking about second half earnings. We can go over that. Lawsuits, metrics, AFC Gamma, lack of consolidation, hemp, and beverages. That will be the topic of conversation. Michael Thompson, along with a few others. I appreciate, obviously, the gifts that you guys have been providing here today. We appreciate it a lot. And let us know as well, all of our viewers out there, if we were to launch a membership-style portion to this YouTube channel, is that something that you guys would subscribe to? And if so, what is some of the content that you'd like to see behind that wall? We'd like to get some feedback because it's ongoing conversations that we're having here at the team. And more importantly, we just want to continue to create content that you guys would like to subscribe to. So with that, appreciate the feedback. And like I always say, leave some comments below and let's keep this conversation going. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, AV. I'll see you back here on Friday morning, 11 a.m. Take care, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Now, that was a good one. What'd you guys all think? Did you like what we had to say here today? Do you agree, disagree with what we're saying? Love to get your feedback. As usual, leave comments below. Trade to Black is growing, and we wouldn't have done it without you. So if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Apple and Spotify for the audio version. And as usual, leave lots of comments. We, as I said, love to hear back from you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.